All right, let's get going. Mr. Brown and Ms. King are ready to begin this morning.
I believe so.
Thank you. The first thing on our agenda is a public hearing. This public hearing held by Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control Board is called to order. It's been held pursuant to KRS Chapter 77 and district regulations. Notice this hearing has been published pursuant to state law. This public hearing is being held via video teleconference. Instructions on making oral and written and oral statements via video teleconference have been distributed. Oral statements must be presented today. Statements should be concise. All statements become part of the hearing record. There are 2 agreed board orders to be reviewed today. Would the staff please present the first agreed board order with Diller and Bradley Company? Mr. Gavette.
Chairman Sullivan, board members, the district brings for the board's consideration an agreement with Hillrick and Bradley Company, which operates a manufacturing facility on West Main Street. The facility produces baseball bats and is subject to a district-issued FEDUC permit. The district alleges that Hillrick and Bradley failed to submit a permit renewal application timely, failed to submit reports prior to their due dates, failed to report all information required in their permits, reported some inaccurate information in their reports, and exceeded their permitted VOC limits. In May of 2022, the company was issued a notice of violation for failing to submit a required permit application and several reports required by the permit. In June of 2022, the company submitted the application and the required reports, which APCD staff began to review. During their review of these reports, the district determined that there were substantial deviations from their permit requirements, resulted in another notice of violation being issued in February 2023. After the district issued the notice of violation for these instances of non-compliance, the company worked with a consultant and brought in additional staff to help with monitoring, record keeping, and reporting. The district has provided a 30-day public comment period for this proposed agreed board order from July 7th to August 6, 2023. It did not receive any comments. The company has agreed to pay a penalty of $11,625 to resolve this notice of violation. The district recommends the board adopt the order as written.
Thank you. Ms. King, as a representative of Hillrick and Bradley, registered to make a statement.
Yes, sir. We have a representative on the WebEx right now at Bynum. And Andy, could you set the view on the screen here so that we can see the set it to grid view?
What are you looking for, Michelle? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm just gonna do it, but I don't wanna, he's remoted in there. So, okay, now we go.
And who,
Mr. Bynum?
Mr. Bynum, can you repeat your name and obviously the affiliation?
They are currently.
It looks like he's muted. I've unmuted Mr. Bynum.
Sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that. My name's Matt Bynum. I'm the factory engineer for Hillrick and Bradley in downtown Louisville.
Okay, can you proceed with your statement, please?
Yes. Thank you for a couple minutes of your time. It's unfortunate that we found these deviations in our reporting practices, and we've been working with some representatives of the APCD district for approximately 18 months now to rectify our record keeping and get into compliance with what we're required to report for the city. So.
All right, thank you. Ms. King, has any member of the public registered to make an oral statement? Any member of the public submitted a written statement? Are there any members of the public in the Edis room that wish to make a comment? If so, please raise your hand. Are there any other members of the public that wish to make a brief comment on this video teleconference? Please raise your hand via video teleconference. You will be called on. This is a feature you can find on the participants list or pressing *3 if joined by a phone, and you will be called upon. Ms. King, has anyone raised their hand?
See no hands raised.
Thank you. Are there any questions from board members? Thank you. Would the staff please present the second agreed board order with Centerpoint Team LLC? Mr. Gouvet?
Chairman Sullivan, board members, the district brings to the board's consideration an agreement with Centerpoint Team LLC, which serves as a project management firm for the Heritage Green apartment complex in South Louisville. The apartment complex has been undergoing stages of renovation since 2015. The district alleges that Centerpoint Team failed to perform a thorough inspection for asbestos prior to conducting renovations, failed to provide notice to the district in advance of renovation activities, and disturbed asbestos without following work practice standards required by the federal rules for asbestos. On August 3rd, 2020, District Compliance Officer Regina Freeman conducted an inspection at the Heritage Green apartment complex and observed a large uncovered pile of potential asbestos-containing material and took samples from the pile to send for lab analysis. Before leaving, she advised the general contractor that the pile needed to be kept wet and covered until it could be cleaned up. Results of the lab analysis were received a few days later, confirming the presence of asbestos materials in the pile. On August 17th, 2020, the district conducted a follow-up inspection and observed the pile had not been covered or wetted. After this inspection, Heritage Green contracted Pinnacle Environmental Group, Inc., a local licensed asbestos contractor, to clean up the debris pile in renovated areas. The district has continued to perform inspections at Heritage Green apartment complex to monitor for any renovations being performed. The company has retained the services of Pinnacle Environmental Group and complied with the requirements for asbestos abatement when needed. The district provided a 30-day public comment period for this board order from July 10th to August 9th, 2023, and did not receive any comments. The company has agreed to pay a penalty of $7,500 to resolve this notice violation. The board may recall a similar agreed board order a few months ago. This order will resolve the last of 3 cases for the same violations at the Heritage Green apartment complex. The district issued violations to the owner of the property, the general contractor of the property, and this project management firm. Cases against the general contractor and property owner have already been resolved with prior agreed board orders. The district recommends the board adopt this order as written.
Thank you. Ms. King, as a representative of Centerpoint, registered to make a statement. Okay. Any members of the public registered to make an oral statement? Okay. Both written and oral, right?
Correct.
Are any members of the public in the edit room that wish to make a comment? If so, please raise your hand. Are there any other members of the public that wish to make a brief statement on this video teleconference? Please raise your hand via video teleconference and you will be called on. This is a feature you can find on the participants list or by pressing *3. If joined by phone, you'll be called upon. Ms. King, any raised hands?
I see no raised hands.
Thank you. Are there any questions from board members? All right, this includes the public hearing portion of our meeting. I will now call the regular meeting of the Louisville Air Pollution Control Board to order. We are conducting the monthly board meeting today via video teleconference. I will call roll call board members that are present on this teleconference. When I call your name, please say yes. Carl Hitton, Jeffrey Coburn, Josephine May, Candace Shrove White,
Yes.
Marissa Neal, Ms. Marissa Allen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Daniel Gars? Yes. And I'm present too. Ms. Hamilton, I understand we have introductions today?
You do?
I'm very pleased this morning to introduce Alex O'Brien. And joined us now as a compliance officer. You may remember Steve Oswald left us after a very long tenure with the district as a compliance officer. And with that, if you don't mind, I'll move into public recognition.
Well, thanks for joining us and welcome to the team.
Public recognitions. The reason that we have Alex joining us as a compliance officer is that of our 3 community compliance officers, they are all retired. Steve last month and this month, going to be saying goodbye to Tina Popes and Mario Beeler. Tina has served 28 years with the district, Mario 30 in a variety of roles. Their last service has been as compliance officers in our community compliance program. And as I've said before, this is one of the toughest jobs in our agency. They are dealing with people who are complaining about dust and odor and open burning. And often these are the first people that someone who's upset at their neighbor sees. And they also have to go and talk to that neighbor. They are amazing in their ability to speak with people, to respond to people, to recommend next steps that appropriately resolve the issues. I am grateful for their service. Hope that you'll join me in recognizing them for their contributions to improving Louisville's air quality and the quality of life for so many people in our community, and also in wishing them well in retirement. Thank you both.
I'd like to say on behalf of the board, thanks for your service. It's really appreciated and well recognized. And again, I just have a good luck in your future endeavors.
I also have the pleasure of this morning announcing Michelle King has now accepted the position as the district's assistant director. Michelle has a BS in environmental science and ecology, a geology minor from Morehead State University, and a doctor of jurisprudence and masters of public affairs from the Indiana University Maurer School of Law, Indiana School of Public and Environmental Affairs. Over the last 18 years, she's provided excellent service and leadership in the Air Pollution Control District in a variety of roles, including environmental coordinator, environmental supervisor, and for the last 8 years as the district's director of program planning and executive administrator. Her two roles were now splitting into two separate positions. Michelle will continue direct oversight of the program planning section, which among other things is responsible for drafting revised ABCD regulations and accompanying documents to implement our delegated Clean Air Act program and local regulations like the START program. Managing the Louisville Metro portion of the Kentucky State Implementation Plan, including attainment planning for achieving national ambient air quality standards, developing and implementing community engagement programs, achieving agency goals to build air quality awareness and build community trust. I have a long list here. And so you're going to see why we need to split these into two separate positions. It's also really working with community groups aligned around environmental quality and public health. And that includes everything from energy, land use, climate change, and sustainability efforts, through policy analysis, public outreach, emissions modeling, land development review, and new program development. Going forward, our full-time executive administrator will be under Michelle. That person will be responsible for helping us manage our budget of about $7 million, including about $1 million in annual grant funding. They'll also take on our outstanding administrative staff, and I really look forward to having that support for us as an agency. I will continue in my role directly overseeing permitting, compliance enforcement, and air monitoring teams.
Again, on behalf of the board, Michelle, congratulations and well deserved. I'm sure that new split of the job will be helpful.
Every level.
The meetings of the regular, minutes of the regular meeting held on July 19th, 2023 were distributed electronically for review. Are there any changes to the minutes by board members? Hearing none, those minutes are adopted. We'll move to the public comment section. Ms. King, is anyone registered to make a comment? Oral. Has anybody provided written comment? Are there any members of the public in the Edison room that wish to make a comment? If so, please raise your hand. Are there any other members of the public that wish to make a brief comment on this video teleconference? Please raise your hand via video teleconference and you'll be called on. This is a feature you can find on a participants list or by pressing *3 if joined by phone and you will be called upon. Any raised hands?
I see none.
Okay, thank you. This completes the public comment portion of the meeting. Unfinished business, there is no unfinished business. There is no new business. Oh, there is, I'm sorry. We're going to go to the agreed board orders. The district has recommended that the board adopt agreed board order with Hillwick and Brasby Company. Is there a motion to adopt the agreed board order with Hillwick and Brasby? Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you. Any discussions? Hearing none, we'll now take a roll call vote. Please unmute your mic and say yes if you wish to adopt the agreed board order with Hillwick and Brasby Company, and no if you do not. Candace Schroep White,
Yes.
Marissa Neal,
Yes.
Daniel Garth. Yes. I vote yes. Agreed board order with Hillwick and Brasby is adopted. Moving on to agreed board order with Centerpoint Team LLC. The district has recommended that the board adopt agreed board order with Centerpoint LLC. Is there a motion to adopt the agreed board order with Centerpoint Team LLC? So moved. Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I will now take a roll call vote. Please unmute your mic and say yes if you wish to adopt the agreed board order with Centerpoint Team, and no if you do not. Candace Schroep White,
Yes.
Marissa Neal,
Yes.
Daniel Garth. Yes. I vote yes. The agreed board order with Centerpoint Team LLC is adopted. Moving on to committee reports, I believe no committees met in the previous month, which brings us to the staff reports and the director's report, Ms. Hamilton.
All right, so we've talked about staffing at length. You're aware the district is part of Metro Government's compensation study. We met yesterday with Human Resources to talk about that compensation study and where it's at this point. They have released on Metro's intranet final report from the contractor that they used to conduct the study, some of its methodology for determining longevity, and a couple of other informational pieces. We had a quick meeting with them, and so we will be looking over that information to really better understand how they applied it to the district. And then, of course, we are waiting to see the compensation studies impact on our union employees who have yet to go through that process. So we are currently advertising to fill a vacant compliance and enforcement coordinator position, and unfortunately, several compliance officer positions as well. There are a few places where your work will, at the end of the day, help people breathe better. And this is one of those. So if you know of people who are looking to come into an organization where they can work with a incredibly well-trained professional, very motivated and dedicated staff, please encourage them to take a look at Metro's job site. We will be posting additional positions in the future. And of course, that's the best place to find all Metro positions.
Do you post in other places?
We do. We have, through Metro HR, they have a clearinghouse that they can use to send directly to university and colleges, which is helpful. Again, word of mouth is kind of the best way. And of course, we try to post them long enough so that they're picked up by those national services. So we do hope to see some really well-qualified candidates. And again, your work will make a difference here. So those of you who have kids graduating, all right, we've talked at length this summer about the Canadian wildfires, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them this morning. Between last month's meeting and this, we've seen much less impact of these Canadian wildfires. I do want to thank Brian Harris for each morning reminding us where we are on this particular incident. And at this point, his recommendation is that we will likely see, and in fact, maybe see some smoke-related impact this morning and through the weekend. So, Brian, is there more that you'd like to add?
No,
Okay. And then, of course, while our temperatures have been unusually mild for this part of the week, we will see a return to more normal summertime temperatures. Unfortunately, for air quality with low humidity, in other words, it's going to be a nice summer weekend, low humidity, but that's when we see the opportunity for more ozone to form. It's hot and muggy. It actually scrubs some of that ozone from the atmosphere. So our air monitoring staff will keep an eye on these potential impacts and of course will issue air quality alerts if needed. The Clean Air Act, as I've described before, is a continuous improvement plan. Every 5 years, EPA is required to come back and evaluate those standards to be sure that the national ambient air quality standards for the criteria of pollutants remain protective of human health and the environment. We're currently waiting to see a revised particulate matter standard. EPA completed the public comment portion of that particular rulemaking back in spring, and we expect to see something from them this fall. Right now, our standard is 12 micrograms per cubic meter. EPA took comment, calling out a new standard of 9 to 10 micrograms per cubic meter, but they also accepted comment as low as 8 and as high as 11. Additionally, EPA is also in the process of evaluating the 2015 ozone national ambient air quality standard of 70 parts per billion. The Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee has released a draft calling for EPA to lower the standard for ozone to between 55 to 60 parts per billion. A standard this low will be challenging for Louisville and a lot of the country. So we will keep the board advised on both of these potential revisions to the national ambient air quality standards as EPA works through its process. I bring this up because managing air quality is a lot like turning an ocean liner. It takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of development work, not just at the local level, but at the national and regional levels as well. There is some national rulemaking that has completed its public comment process. In particular, that is US EPA's greenhouse gas regulations for power plants and other sources, which was proposed by EPA on May 11th. And under that proposal, it will limit carbon dioxide in fossil fuel powered plants and some other fossil fuel fired industries. The proposal will set limits for new gas-fired combustion turbines, existing coal, oil, and gas-fired generating units, and certain existing gas-fired combustion turbines. Public comment period ended on August 8th, and the docket today includes over 700 comments. Some of these will be fairly simple. We support this. Others will be very complex and technically oriented. So at this point, EPA's got a lot of work ahead of them in order to finalize this particular rulemaking. We're interested in it in particular. It will reduce greenhouse gases. There is plenty of funding through the Inflation Reduction Act to help incentivize some of those reductions. But we're also interested in those co-benefits that will reduce particulate matter and those precursors of ozone, in particular nitrogen oxide. So when we look at Louisville and its air quality, ABCD has jurisdiction sources here, but not all the pollution is actually made here. We get a fair amount of transported pollution coming into our area. US EPA has modeled that about 30% of the nitrogen oxides within our airshed come from outside of the county. So we're always interested in large scale national and regional rulemakings and the impact they can have to further reduce pollution. For the same reason, we'll be following the litigation associated with US EPA's Good Neighbor Federal Implementation Plan under the 2015 Ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standard. This federal implementation plan, which is required if a state does not submit a state implementation plan, or if it submits an insufficient state implementation plan. Federal government creates a plan, puts it in place, can always be changed by a state submitting an approvable state implementation plan. But in the meantime, this federal bill is focusing on ensuring that 23 states meet the Clean Air Act's Good Neighbor requirements to reduce pollution that significantly contributes to pollution in downwind states. They've modeled pollution from other places that prevent other jurisdictions from reaching those national ambient air quality standards. At present, there are dozens of states and industry petitioners challenging the final neighbor plan. It's at least 7 different jurisdictions, including the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. So it's a pretty complex litigation at this point. Generally speaking, the petitioners are seeking to stay the final rule pending completion of judicial review, and that's a process unto itself. At this point, Commonwealth of Kentucky is one of those petitioners. And so they filed in the Sixth Circuit. We'll keep the board up to date on that litigation as it proceeds. That's good. Follow your plan. So with that, are there any questions on that?
How long does the ZBA have to respond to the 700 comments?
Well, as
Never
long as it
been one.
takes. So we've seen that, sometimes that's a fairly quick process, depending on the rulemaking. Sometimes it's delayed. The rule can be imminent, which may have different meanings for all of us. And
In a geologic sense, it's imminent.
we've been down that road. So last Thursday, Matt King, the district's environmental manager responsible for industrial permitting, represented the district at the Kentucky Chamber Environmental Permitting and Reporting Conference and spoke on ozone redesignation process and our projected attainment status for the proposed PM 2.5 NAM rulemaking, environmental justice policies and public participation, projected, photochemical assessment monitoring station data. That's our PAM station at our NCOR site at Cannons Lane, and also details about our APCD's 2023 annual report. That same night, Ms. King attended the regular meeting of the Rivertown Community Advisory Council, and last night we both attended the regular meeting of the West Jefferson County Community Task Force. At both of these meetings, MSD discussed its release of peracetic acid at its Bells Lane pumping station on August 5th. During this release, a shelter-in-place order was issued around 10:30 in the morning in an area that included about 50 homes, and all lanes of Interstate 264 were blocked due to chemical spill crews working to mitigate the hazmat incident. The shelter-in-place order was lifted about 5 p.m. It's my understanding that this chemical is used as a disinfectant in the Bells Lane high-rate wet weather treatment facility, and it contains hydrogen peroxide and acetic acid and sulfuric acid as well. MSD is subject to the Louisville Metro Hazardous Materials Ordinance, and APCD is currently investigating the release under our own regulations. That follows into our discussion today about the emergency response that you may be aware of for a controlled burn of a home on Applegate Lane in Highview. There's a lot of media coverage on this, and I want to let folks know that Metro has set up on its website under emergency services a clearinghouse of information for people who have concerns about this event. Global Metro Emergency Services is coordinating a multi-agency response to the situation. This includes the Fern Creek Fire Department, Shively Fire, Louisville Fire, Louisville Metro's Police Bomb Squad, the Louisville Metro Department of Public Health and Wellness, the Hazardous Incident Response Team, the Kentucky National Guard, the FBI, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, APCD, and others. Operational plans are now being worked on, and as I said, information about the incident is available on Louisville Emergency Services webpage. The operational planning is following the plans laid out in the Louisville Jefferson County Government Emergency Operations Plan, and we'll send a link out with this meeting so that folks can see this plan. A unified command has been established and working groups, which include operations, safety, public information, planning, finance. Now we're working together. Louisville Jefferson County is well served by a group of first responders, including the fire departments who often serve as incident commanders, the Emergency Management Agency, FSD, and Louisville Metro Public Health and Wellness. Their staff includes specially trained hazmat technicians who respond to hazardous material incidents. In addition to their specialized trainers as first responders, they also have specialized equipment that allows them to enter hot zones, perform emergency air and water sampling and monitoring to assess health impacts during hazardous material incidents. In addition, they have authority to require the cleanup of contaminated areas. APCD is not a first responder. Our staff are not trained as hazmat technicians. This specialized training isn't necessary for us to do our day-to-day work that includes investigating community complaints, where we have found the discovery of hazardous material incidents, where first responders then came into action. Permitting, inspecting, compliance work, enforcement of violations, and implementing our risk management plan program don't require us to have that training. But during hazardous material incidents, the district provides technical support to first responders as needed. When an incident involves a source permitted by the district, we have specialized knowledge about the facility, including the location of equipment, storage of chemicals, and in the case of many of the facilities subject to the Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program and the Risk Management Program, we also have specialized modeling and planning that may be helpful for first responders. We also have specialized knowledge of the area's air quality from our ambient air monitoring. And I really want to draw a distinction here, because we're going to talk a lot about monitoring, and there are a lot of different types, including distinctions in emergency response air monitoring and our own ambient air monitoring system. What we do is the systematic long-term assessment of levels by measuring the quantity and types of certain pollutants in the surrounding outdoor area. That is what our monitoring stations focus on. In fact, we have a network of these monitoring stations that are strategically located to measure regional air quality. And we collect that data on a continuous basis or on a sampling basis, where we send samples off to a lab for assessment. In this case, this hazardous materials incident, we've been asked to assist due to our specialized knowledge about the area's ambient air quality. Air monitoring during a hazardous materials incident helps protect the public from acute exposure hazards of unplanned air contaminant releases. And our colleagues with the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet's Emergency and Response Branch, Public Health and Wellness, and US EPA's Emergency Response Team have the right monitoring tools, which are different from our regulatory monitors. And they have the experience to use those to assess the air during that emergency incident. I'd like to thank Matt Mudd, the district's communications specialist, for his work with Unified Communications Group, and Billy DeWitt, Air Monitoring Program Manager, Brian Harris, Air Monitoring Data Analyst and QA Toxic Supervisor, and Tom Law, Air Monitoring Project Supervisor, for their assistance with this incident. Are there any questions about my report to this point?
In regards to the house, has it actually been get permitted before it burns?
Not from APC. So there is a process of condemnation. And again, that is one option that is currently being explored. And I encourage people to follow the Louisville Metro Emergency Services website for more information. Any other questions? All right, moving on. As I've shared with the board, I see you looking. For those of you who were not here last month, we actually broke our conversation about air sensors into two parts. Last month, we talked about some sensors that the district is using, S-pods and some remotely operated canister systems in the field to evaluate volatile organic compounds and odors. We're going to talk today about some other type of sensors that may be more accessible to the public. And for Vice Chairman Sullivan, we brought show and tell. With that in mind, Tom Law is going to present today, and Tom serves on US EPA's Air Sensor Steering Committee and has a wealth of information to share.
Thank you very much. So while we get this loaded up, good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. So yeah, we're going to do some show and tell. Probably at the end, I'll explain some of this stuff, but I'm going to put some stuff in front of you guys so you can think about some questions. Sure. Give the presentation. These are covered right now. These are air sensors. These get into all kinds of different types and stuff. The example of ones the two you have are mounted right here, like it might be in a field situation. This is the best sensor. We'll give that to you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of other things to think about. Just our traditional methods.
That's how it's all mounted, these devices.
Correct. Two of those are the same brand. One of them is a different brand. I'll cover that a little bit more. I just thought, might help you think of some questions to ask looking at that. And then these are examples of one of our oldest methods, the federal reference method, which also cover that are collected on filters like this that are Teflon that we call out later. Those are the
PM 2.5.
Yes.
Those of us online can't see anything. We can just see the first slide of the presentation.
Oh, let's see. That's on Andy there. And I'll try to get towards the question and answer portion of the session. I'll try to zoom these into the camera a little bit better. So those are unsampled, and these represent some that have been sampled. These are from 2014. We have to maintain a chain of custody for 5 years, so I can only let you touch things that are really old there.
Okay. Don't bruise on them.
On the owl.
Oh, and ow.
Make sure the owl hears.
Okay. All right. So good morning, everyone. The presentation that I'm going to give to you today is hybrid. We had given part of this presentation to a community group that was interested in using air sensors. And as Director Hamilton mentioned, I am a steering committee member of the EPA's AQ Exchange group, and we talk about emerging technologies, how to communicate the data from those emerging technologies and put them in the correct context. So that way they are not confused with regulatory data, which is going to be very different. I'm going to get into all of that. And there are also a couple of additional slides and things that are just really interesting that have happened since the original presentation to let you guys be aware of. All right. Andy, next slide, please. All right, so low-cost air sensors and their uses. Low-cost air sensors are an emerging technology to measure air pollutants. They enable citizen scientists to learn more about their environment. They can increase spatial resolution of regulatory air monitoring networks. They can further education and research into air pollution detection and characterization. The two pictures in the slides there are the one in the top right is from our Cannons Lane site. A few of those sensors you have in front of you there. A couple of the other sensors are used by the University of Louisville's Green Park project, and we facilitate co-location of their sensors so that way they can establish calibration curves for their research. Next slide, please.
What is low cost?
We're going to get into that.
Okay.
It's kind of high cost if you have my wallet, but low cost compared to the other things. So it is a fluid term. All right, so some of these slides is the presentation to citizen group, which we wanted to have ready because as this emerging technology has been present, some regulatory agencies are being presented with surprising and sometimes competing data sets. Someone shows up on the door and says, "Hey, I did this research." So we want to give people a heads up and make sure that they're collecting good data. So the questions I laid out for them are, what pollutants are you concerned about? You have to find a sensor that measures what you're hoping to measure, and its sensitivity that you hope to measure. What is your study area for using a sensor? These are a lot of questions, and we also ask ourselves in developing quality assurance project plans and state monitoring plans. How many sensors do you have available? What areas do you have accessible to site those in? What's your prevailing wind direction? What sources of pollution are you interested in your area? How long will you be doing the study? Some people, if they buy a sensor, they may just want it at their house, want to know what their air quality always is. You may be interested in something that's going on in your neighborhood, and you may want to have it focused for a shorter time period. And you also, in that case, have to assess how long can I continue with this work? Can this go on to infinity, or do I have maybe 6 months to do this problem? Next slide, please.
Then we have a raised hand from King Showline.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Question?
If you have a question.
Yeah, the raised hand was reviewing the samples that he had. We weren't able to see that because of the presentation.
I think
Okay.
you may need to adjust the viewing settings on your end to make the video screen larger on your screen.
And as we get towards the end of the session, anything that you would like more focused on the camera, I'll take care of that.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
All right. So again, if you get some air sensors and you're hoping to do citizen science project, research project, you need to consider what resources you have. So your sensor inventory, you need to look at any support you have from the manufacturer. They're your best friend. Bought a device from them, they're going to support you. They're the first person to ask questions from. What personnel you may have. So are you, if you're a neighborhood group, for example, what type of skills do you have to work with? Do you have someone who's good with data? Do you have someone that's handy with tools that can cite things? Do you have someone that has an ample amount of time to attend to these sensors and look at the data? And then infrastructure outside of that. Some of these sensors need plug-in power, some of them don't. Some of them need Wi-Fi, some of them don't. So you need to look at all of those things and mounting solutions. Where are you going to put them? Some people may want to mount them on a telephone pole, others are going to mount them at their house. And you need to consider all of those things when you were developing a sensor project. And security. Vandalism is a thing. We deal with it on our regulatory sites every now and then, unfortunately. Next slide, please. All right, so in doing this, we also educated groups about APCD's air monitoring network. And so our air monitoring team operates 5 sites around the city. They gather about 40 million data points per year. All of our data points that we gather have the goal of being legally defensible, which is something that sensor data does not provide. Using sensors correctly, you can get scientifically sound data, but scientifically sound and legally defensible are 2 different bars. It's easy to get scientifically sound. To be legally defensible is a very high bar.
To the neighborhood projects, for lack of a better term for those, are they well aware of that distinction?
I would say they're generally not aware unless they viewed a presentation like this or seen similar resources. So at our air monitoring sites, we monitor for all the criteria pollutants listed in the slide, in addition to air toxics of 60+ ozone precursors, black carbon, radiation, meteorology. And we do that in coordination with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management and the Kentucky Department of Air Quality to cover the Louisville MSA. And next slide, please, Amy. All right, so with our air monitoring network, our siting objectives are to characterize population exposure and observe maximum concentrations to protect public health. Excuse my voice this morning. Our personnel are trained air quality scientists who have degrees in physical sciences or engineering to support the Clean Air Act. We go through rigorous quality control steps, which are daily review of the data, maintaining the instruments, repairing instruments and infrastructure around the sites, and go through rigorous quality assurance checks. That includes a very long list of rules to meet that legally defensive bar. The quality control team works in conjunction with the quality assurance team, but we are two separate teams, and the quality assurance team checks our work. Work is reviewed and reviewed and reviewed, and then audited by both the state and audited by the EPA. So there's a lot of double check measures built into our data collection. The equipment that we use has been approved by EPA's Office of Research and Development and are classified as either federal reference methods, which this big box here is that I'll talk a little bit more about later, or federal equivalency methods. Equivalency methods are newer, more continuous. Reference methods are the gold standard that have been around for decades, with varying temporal resolution and different pollutants that they can monitor. Next slide, please. Excuse me, it's the water. This is just an example of two of our regulatory sites to highlight how difficult those are and how complex. They can range from a pretty small footprint to a really large footprint. Each site has to be robust for security, electricity, communications, which sensors do not. Sensors can have onboard cell capability and solar power and can be moved around very easily. To put a regulatory site down is really difficult. You have to come up with a plan that's approved for your data collection and your quality assurance. And then you also have to get into a land use agreement. You have to put out a bid for construction, things like that. It's really difficult to install a regulatory site.
They have backup generators or?
No, we do not have backup generators. Typically, we don't have a lot of data loss due to power outages, but that does happen occasionally. I think our most recent might have been for about 12 hours at our Allen site. Usually it's storm related for us if we have a power outage. Next slide, please. All right, so how do sensors differ from regulatory monitors? Regulatory monitors are pretty expensive, $10,000 to $100,000. With recent inflation, that $10,000 low is bumped up, probably more like $15,000, something like that. They're also difficult to buy at that level. We have to put those out for bid also. They have to be operated by trained scientists. It's not easy to interpret the data from those all the time and to calibrate those correctly and get them working in a way that is legally defensible.
So are these in the $10,000 range?
No, let's see. The ones on the outside there are about $1,500 for a one-time cost and then a data subscription yearly. And then the one in the middle there is actually a free equipment cost, but you pay for a data subscription. We'll talk a little bit more about those. So regulatory monitors, I've mentioned a lot of this already, rigorously tested before they're approved. Robust quality control and quality assurance procedures to operate them. They're not very portable. They require expensive support infrastructure. We have to be temperature controlled at all of our sites. We've got a range that they can operate reliably. They are highly accurate, highly precise, and the intercomparability amongst monitors is excellent. Usually have 5 to 10 year life with good maintenance. Just one thing, talking about our QC team and how great they are. Being a small agency, we repair all of our own equipment. Where a lot of the state agency, for example, has a warehouse full of guys just repairing stuff, and they can go get a new one off the shelf anytime they want. So our people do a lot of great work, not just collecting the data, but turning wrenches, calibrating lasers, things like that, and save the city a lot of money. Air sensors are more affordable, and now we're talking the low cost. So $250 would be an entry into the market for a sort of reliable PM 2.5 sensor called Purple Air, which is the most popular right now. I do not have an example of that one. And $10,000 plus too, which we're really getting out of affordable for me anyway. And depending on how complex the sensor is, really is, you know, the upper end of the price. Sensors can be operated by anybody that can afford them. They don't limit who they sell to. Limited testing before they hit the market. Some of these come out really quickly. A lot of sensor manufacturers are startups. They go from idea to a tangible product in a very short amount of time. They are highly portable. We can install one, the one on the middle of the table there. I could go put it somewhere in the next hour. They are user-friendly. They create a dashboard. It's more like a phone app or something that has some built-in analytics so that you don't have to be a scientist to interpret that data. Although, if you're not trained to interpret that data, you can make some mistakes in that interpretation in its context. They are less accurate, and there's lots of variability between units, and their longevity is unknown. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to look at the data here, how that differs. Sensors are good at indicative measurements, while our regulatory instruments can give you the legally defensible numbers. So by indicative measurements, it means that the number may not be the true number, but it can show trends and patterns very well, which is very useful in certain situations. Very useful for educational purposes, and typically, a lot of the PM 2.5 sensors do trend well with our regulatory instruments, but they're always biased high. They have a very high number. And then at higher concentrations, that bias reduces a little bit. Sensors are used quite a bit in remote areas for wildfire smoke detection. As I think you guys might have seen during Brian's last presentation about fire and smoke map, which will show an example of that in a few minutes also. Currently, PM 2.5 sensors are the most reliable. And one of the reasons for that, in the sensors that I gave you there, you can see two sort of bluish boxes. No, the sensor next to you, those bluish boxes there with circles fit into them. Those are optical sensors that were built for industrial HVAC systems. So millions of those have been made in an optical system. It's got a light and a detector, and every particle that moves through it is counting that particle and measuring that particle. While they're not accurate at lower ranges, the software takes care of a lot of that, and algorithms within the instruments are trying to get better accuracy. And then we'll talk about co-location in a minute, which enhance that accuracy even further. So PM10 sensors overestimate quite a bit. Gaseous pollutant sensors are right now not very reliable, and VOC sensors are less reliable. All of those do give indicative measurements that are useful in their own applicable situations, but again, are not good for legally defensible regulatory data at this moment. Some other differences there, just in the output, is not just the accuracy of the data, but temporal scales and time averaging. And I have to say, this is one place where APCD has directly contributed to improving these things. By Director Hamilton suggesting me to be on the CPA steering committee for AQ Exchange, we have had many work groups with manufacturers, other scientists, and we had developed a set of recommendations for manufacturers, and many of those manufacturers have adopted those recommendations and are passing that advice along to their customers. So I'm really proud of our work in that process. Next slide, please. Right, best practices for using air sensors, very scaled down version of best practices of regulatory air monitoring. Record all your actions, keep a dedicated notebook of your project, noting times, people involved, times that you touch the sensor. Initial those things so you know who did that. service visits following manufacturer's instructions. All the manufacturers have a, hey, this is how you take care of your sensor. If you have a problem, here's a fact checklist. They have technical support numbers, which we reiterate to any users that, your manufacturer is your friend. They owe you some service, so they can talk to them. During troubleshooting or investigating high-low readings, I encourage citizens or anyone else using it to make all their observations. And this is something we do too. No observation is trivial when we're at a regulatory site. If someone's cutting the grass nearby, if there is a car idling nearby, if you smell something funny in the air, none of those observations are trivial and they can all affect your data. And I listed out a couple of examples for citizens there. If they're installing one in their home, make sure it's not close to their grill. If they use their lawnmower, take care of when it's run directly under the sensor. And when you see high readings, there are tools you can use. Tri-mark cameras, something I use too with my regulatory data. If I see a high spike at one of our sites, I'll look at one of the tri-mark cameras, see if maybe there's a traffic ticket or something. And we're getting more automobile contribution in 2.5. Next slide, please. And again, just reiterating what I've told citizen groups before, citing is tremendous. Because if you cite your sensor in the wrong place, you can get a lot of bias. Some examples before our national work group started implementing some guidelines, people were putting them over the fan portion of your HVAC unit outside. When that thing comes on, it's just blowing dust up into it. It looks like there's a major event going on, and you just put it in the wrong place. And there are lots of opportunities for local sources of bias when you're not doing regulatory work, because it's not the most prevalent thing. Next slide, please. All right, so choosing scales, and at this point, manufacturers have adopted the first advice up there to use the US EPA AQI scale, because that's something that's very confusing to the average citizen scientist. Micrograms per cubic meter, how do I put that into context? And so the US EPA AQI is easier for the average citizen to understand. And so we pushed lawn manufacturers to make that as their default setting. And that's another really win for our AQ Exchange work group and APCD's contribution in making more uniform use of sensors than normal. Averaging times, I went over that before, and that's another thing that many manufacturers have adopted and put as their default settings. Next slide, please. Right, reviewing the data. A lot like ours, you got to review it often. Daily is best. Several times a day is even better. Looking for anomalies, spikes, and valleys in the data. And this goes back to if a citizen group is evaluating the personnel they have available to do that. There are many other fields outside of science in which reviewing graphs is the norm. Finance. So you can look at the tools you have as far as a citizen group, and you can plug in your most appropriate tool to do that job, to review the data or to access your sensor and doing service on it. Data archival, most manufacturers take care of that. They're mostly cloud-based services. There are options. So the sensors there do have many SD cards in them that can be taken out and downloaded. They don't have to be on the cloud to be collecting data. And then the data that you get out, this is where it gets really difficult to use. If you're just using the US EPA AQI number, that's pretty easy to use. A data download from one of these sensors probably has 20 to 30 parameters in it that are all in varying units and varying time scales, and then that can get very confusing to interpret if you're not a trained scientist. Next slide, please. All right, so available regulatory resources to help people out. US EPA Region 4 awarded the district a sensor citizen co-location filter, and that is the steel box in the lower left hand picture in the middle of the screen there. That's made to have good ambient airflow while also having protection from storms for people's property that's placed in there. Once you put something in there, I mean, that shelter is really robust. You could hit it with a sledgehammer, not a hole in it. Couple examples of sensors cited in there. Those are just the district sensors at this point, mock-up on the right-hand side. And next slide, Andy. And we've just recently taken the step, Matt Mudd, our communications director, has put together this air sensors page on our website that covers a lot of the information that I've talked about, has links to some of the resources that I have in my presentation, and also has a link to I'm gonna mess up the title, everybody should help me. The user agreement for citizens to place their sensors in our shelter for co-location. Basically, I mean, we want to provide them a service to make sure that they're getting accurate data, and we want to get ahead of that and take care of that on the front end instead of on the back end of that. And basically, by them having a resource too, you know, they can come talk to experts, and you know, I'll give them my time. I love talking to people about this stuff. Next slide, please. Okay, some more things. The EPA Air Sensors Toolbox is the largest repository of air sensor information. And that website is huge now. It's always getting a new page in it. Lots of stuff covered in there. Next slide. And this right here, this is a book put out by Sonoma Tech, who was contracted by the South Coast Air Quality Management District in Los Angeles. They are leaders in air sensor research and air sensor deployment. They also maintain the AQ spec, which is the only non-EPA right now that I'm aware of air sensor testing unit. And they have those results published on their website. So if you're considering buying an air sensor, you can log into their website. You can see how it compares to regulatory data with R squared, root mean squared, and other co-location metrics. And next slide, please, Andy. Okay, so that covers the portion that I've given to neighborhood groups so far. So now we're going to get into just a little air sensor use and other air sensor things. So non-regulatory air sensor applications, something that the APCD did here. Picture is our program manager, Billy DeWitt, installing the Clarity brand sensor that's in front of you, Mr. Chairman, on a telephone pole down under Interstate 64 around 12th and Rowan Streets, right by the entrance to the canal locks. So the reason for that is we collaborated with the Environment Institute of Louisville, who was concerned about playground placement of the waterfront park expansion. That, you know, right under the expressway, what kind of exposure are you getting from PM 2.5 from a mobile contribution? So our Clarity unit was deployed at our near road site for 30 days for co-location. Our near road site was the most appropriate because it's there to characterize particulate that you would find around the roadway. You're going to have some diesel particulate there, a lot of automobile particulate, which best mimics that site that's going to have a lot of diesel contribution from those barges, trains, and you know, gas and diesel sources on the interstate. So we did a 30-day co-location there, and with this Clarity brand sensor, they worked with us, and as a third party, we give them our data, they look at that data, and they establish a calibration curve for us, which improved the accuracy quite tremendously. And so that way, once we deployed it, we were pretty confident that the readings we were getting were reasonable. Although even with that 30-day calibration, the air sensor still reads higher than our regulatory equipment side by side at our near road site. So there was still some interpretation to the data that was needed. The unit was deployed for 6 weeks, after which we took it down. Our data analysis showed that that site is exposed to less PM 2.5 than our near road site. Our near road site is our maximum concentration site, which is also in attainment for the next. So we were able to reasonably say that that area is also in attainment for the next. Now, during this time, we were also getting some wildfire impacts. So we were measuring some higher levels than what we would see during normal ambient situations. While we live with fire, we're getting used to it. Next slide, please. All right, so citizen use of air sensors. That is a picture of the EPA's fire and smoke map, which I think most of us have seen a lot of over the past couple months. And currently there are 9 purple air PM sensors on that map. It's a little hard for me to see back here, but they're symbolized by squares on the map, where regulatory sites are symbolized by circles, and they follow the color coding of the current US EPA AQI for PM 2.5. Now, right now, there are 14,000 purple air sensors on the fire and smoke map, and purple air is the only sensor that is allowed on the smoke map right now because the manufacturer was willing to unload their proprietary technology on EPA and work with them. One of the other reasons they're on there, and because of that collaboration, each one of those units that's showing up on the map is having its data corrected in real time with an EPA-derived correction factor. Biases and sensors are usually most heavily influenced by temperature and humidity. So Louisville in the summertime, sensors have a lot of bias. By doing that correction factor, it does bring it in line quite a bit, although it is fairly regular to still see sensors reading higher than regulatory sites on this map. There are lots of fact sheets for the sensors themselves and on the map that explains why that is and why air sensors have bias, usually high bias compared to regulatory monitors. Just recently, another development is that new sensors will be allowed on the map soon, and that's all involved with a sensor's willingness to work with EPA and test it out. This Clarity brand sensor in the middle is one of those sensors that looks like it's going to be added to the map.
So the 14,000 sensors on the map, that's nationwide?
A little bit outside the nation too. There are several in Canada, but it's mostly in the continental
Are
US.
those predominantly private citizen, private group sensors, or are they regulatory sensors?
It's a mix of everything. So there are regulatory groups using air sensors to supplement their networks. You would see that mostly in California, it's heavy in Massachusetts, New York. Along the West Coast, Washington has them. Then there are single citizens using several of them. And then there are a lot of non-governmental organizations and citizen groups that are putting up networks as well. So they have exploded onto the scene over the past few years.
We'd like to get more.
Yeah, it's there's just going to be more coming up there. All right, next slide, please. All right, so when air sensors go bad, regulatory instruments have some QA built into databases in addition to our human QA that prevents broadcasting bad data. We wouldn't want to cause an air quality alert because one of our instruments is malfunctioning. That would be very bad. We also would not want to miss an episode of high concentrations because one of our instruments was malfunctioning. And as part of our quality assurance plans, we take care of that. This example, I can't see the date. That is a snip from someone's iPhone right there. Them looking at air quality data. And I believe that's from July 14th when we were having very bad impacts from Canadian wildfire smoke. And what we can see there is around where it's labeled J-Town. Some of us can see that better than others right now. That sensor is showing good air quality data, while all the other sensors and regulatory sites around there are showing very poor air quality due to the wildfires. So this sensor was probably installed indoors. The Purple Air brand, for example, they can tell you, hey, you can measure your indoor air. Now they have, when you set it up with your laptop or your phone, it gives you an option to pick, is this installed outdoors or indoors? So they chose wrong there, or their sensor is just broken. Next slide, please. All right, so to address something like that, this is another thing that our AQ Exchange group really pushed. We needed to be able to change symbology on the map. So the AI have to look for sensors that do not match I shouldn't say match, but are not in close agreement to other sensors and regulatory monitors around them. And then we'll produce a box like this that says there is no AQI available, basically letting you know that the data the sensor is producing is not representative of ambient conditions. And sometimes that's done automated, and in this case, there was actually a call made to the purple air manufacturer to say, hey, will you check on the sensor? It doesn't look good to us.
So you have to reach out to each sensor, or is that automated?
There is some automation, but the automation misses some of them. And so there are cases where you will have to reach out and request that. And so far, Purple Air has been very accommodating of people doing that. I would assume that new manufacturers being added to the map will also extend that customer service.
It's doing the reaching out, the manufacturer.
For this particular one, I brought it up with my contact in my group, who is the fire and smoke map boss, and he called Purple Air for me. Let's look at that one. Next slide, please. That's it. So questions, I'm going to go, before we get into the complete questions, I'll talk about some of these show and tell items that we have out here. And how are we doing on time?
We've got a few minutes, but while Tom is getting things set up, I do want to let the board know that we've been awarded a grant from US EPA that came to us without competition. You simply had to make a recommendation for its use. And so we recommended to US EPA to use that money to stand up an air sensor lending library where we'll purchase a set of these lower cost purple air monitors and even some more sophisticated sensors, and then we'll work with community groups to help them establish projects within their neighborhoods to answer questions or concerns that they may have. So that award is imminent from US EPA, and when we receive it, we'll let the board know that we have it in hand.
Okay, let's see, I was trying to get the camera, but I'm probably blocking your all's view back here. So just this instrument right here is a federal reference method for PM 2.5. With the small filter cassettes, the blue rings that I gave you, those take 24-hour samples that pass through this instrument and then have to be sent off to a laboratory. It's one data point for every 3 days. That's a 24-hour average, and the turnaround from the laboratory is about 3 weeks or so.
What's the measure? Is it weight measurement or is it optical or?
Yes, so this one is gravimetric. So they do measure the mass on it, and then to derive a concentration, they take the volume of flow, which we measure all the time with NIST traceable instruments, to get the concentration of that. The evolution of PM instruments have gone to a beta attenuation, and currently we're using an optical method that's very much more robust than this optical method that gives us 1 minute data resolution, which is the best that it's been so far.
And that's going to be more accurate, I assume, than weighted on.
The reference method is what everything is based off of. There are some biases in the reference method. If there are volatiles attached to particulate, then those volatiles can escape. One of the other things that affect measurements is humidity in the air. So one way that we deal with bias for humidity on continuous instruments like optical methods is by heating a sample chamber. And so hopefully it mitigates all the humidity that's in there. But there are times that it's possible that some of that humidity is not mitigated and may be erroneously affected as particulate. So every method, no matter how good, no matter how inexpensive, does have the possibility for some biases here and there. But for the FRM and FEM methods, those biases have been mitigated and minimized to the extent possible. And let's see, can board members on camera see this? This is right here. So this PM 2.5 sensor is a brand called Lunar Outpost. This is what it would look like set up in the field. You could put this on a telephone pole or other mountable place where no one can just reach it. Solar powered, it'll run until it breaks. The inside of that looks like this. The PM is gathered in these two sensors right here. It has a very small fan. that takes it in there. And again, there's a light and a detector source that's just counting each particle that goes through and then measuring that particle for its size. And then goes through an algorithm to spit out an output. Let's see, did everyone who's viewing remotely see that okay? Oh. And then one of our other sensors, and this is one we use down at the Waterfront Park. This is a Clarity brand sensor. It has the same optical technology that measures down here in the bottom. I'm not used to the L, sorry. And currently, this sensor is one of the best qualities on the market right now. The team behind it has put together the best algorithm. They also do the co-location calibration that I mentioned earlier, which is something that other sensor manufacturers are not doing. So that really boosts my confidence in using it. And this is also the most portable that there is. I mean, you can see as this is pretty portable, the solar panel weighs, I don't know, about 8 pounds or so, you know, gotta come up with a mounting device. Billy was able to mount this down at Waterfront Park just using a tow strap from a truck, you know, nothing real fancy. This is about the size of a football, much smaller, lightweight solar panel, really easy to use.
Does the solar panel affect the airflow? It looks like it's in
In this one, the flow is from the bottom. And while these do have small fans on them, a lot of the intake, they rely, it's kind of passive and depends on convection. Well, I shouldn't say completely passive because the fan does provide some power, but the convection of the heat of the day, even on cold days, helps get some of the air there. All right, and let's see, our board members who are viewing remotely wanted to see filters. So I'll try to get this. Board members, so this is for the FRM method, which was the big instrument back on the table that I showed you. This represents a clean, unsampled filter. It's Teflon, which is weighed at a laboratory before we get it and then collects a sample and then we send it back to the laboratory for weighing. After it's sampled, I can't take this out of here, unfortunately. If you can see the darkening of the filter there, that's a 24-hour particulate sample, and this one is from 2014 and from our near road site. So that's going to have a lot of carbonaceous species of PM due to being near the roadway. This was also collected at that site 3 days before, and this one's a little cleaner. So we do see, even in the 24-hour time resolution, a difference between days when we sample. Try to follow the owl there, sorry.
You did well.
I'm not used to the owl. And any questions?
One is, how do you deal with all the data? It's going to let it grow. And, you know, also it opens all kind of questions about how people use them.
So from a regulatory agency's perspective, data is information.
Right.
And when we are given data that comports with our regulatory monitoring, that's really good news for us. That helps us ground truth our regional planning. If we have data that is not what we expected, that's a really good opportunity for us to dig deeper and to look at it from that regulatory perspective of what might be causing that issue. We'll start, as Tom has suggested, of course, checking to be sure that the instrument is properly cited, that there isn't some compounding factor, but there will be differences of air quality at a neighborhood scale.
How
So
much more work does it have or impose upon the district staff?
with respect to setting up a sensor lending library, we will be adding in some additional staff to support that work. It is possible that we could see a need for further expansion, either of some staff to support sensor networks, or it could lead us to further evaluate our regulatory programs. Is there a need for us, for example, to come to the board with a stronger, either to control dust, say, for example, from construction sites? Or is there a source-specific issue that we need to address? So.
Yeah, Director Hamilton touched on most of that. Different agencies are doing things differently. And as you look at different agencies across the country, The size, abilities of agencies varies tremendously. So there are some agencies who have not touched sensors yet. No one is using sensors in their area. There are other agencies that have been doing this for a long time. And there are possibilities that, you may need a full-time sensor employee to deal with citizen science. You may need full-time sensor employees to deal with regulatory additions in using sensors. Again, right now, sensors are not used for regulatory determinations of the NACs, but in some ways, what they are being used for, the National Forest Service and Oregon, Washington, and California regulatory agencies are using these as supplements to measure wildfire smoke. Once you're saving lives out in the rural areas, you can deal with a little bit of inaccuracy to give somebody some information to tell them whether it's time to go or not. And then I think California right now is the only state, I forgot which house bill it is, forgive me, I speak science more than politics, that they're actually using sensors in fence line monitoring pretty regularly. And then in construction projects, like just for dust mitigation, they might have one of these monitors looking for PM10 upwind of a site and downwind of a site just outside of their construction zone.
Question from the audience.
We've talked a lot about sensors monitoring ambient fine particulate. What are other regulated air pollutants where you see sensors expanding for accuracy closer to?
Okay, so that's a really great question. Right now, there is one sensor that meets FEM capability for ozone, but I use the word sensor lightly. It's made by 2B manufacturers, and it's a lot larger than this. It's more of a box about this size, and so what they've done is they've taken all the guts out of a federal equivalency method ozone analyzer and just put it in a smaller weather-tight box that still needs a little more infrastructure. It still needs 120 volt electricity, then cell capability, increases communication and everything, but it's still a good dedicated power source and can't work with solar. But the numbers that are output by it are useful for ozone. I think one of the best applications of that particular monitor is it has a display that is public facing. You can walk up to it, it's a box, and this particular instrument, if you were to put it in a public space, it actually displays the concentration of ozone for a person. And cost on that one right now, I'm not sure. I haven't asked for a quote, but I would be willing to bet that's like in the $15,000 to $20,000 range for that.
Any other questions from board members? Thanks for the show and tell.
Pleasure.
Appreciate that. Very informative. All right, real quick, let's go. Any comments on air quality or toxic, which I don't think was included this month? Environmental status report, the emissions, excess emissions event report, and complaint investigation status summary. And considering the fires, the normal summer is fairly consistent.